Hello and happy Tuesday. It is time for hemp. And it is nice if you get a chance to share us with your friends. That would be very gracious. That's how we're found. Because right now, these programs aren't even announced. We just put them together and put them out. But starting next week, they're going to be released on a regular basis. I'll be telling you more about that later in the show. And we're going to be doing 5 of these a week, which is pretty fun. And we're going to be bringing guests on and doing all kinds of informative things that lets the whole world know how important it is to end cannabis prohibition and, of course, take time for hemp.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spend. Take another look now and take some time for hemp. I know cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rest. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
It is a beautiful day here in Portland, Oregon. There is a heat wave going on here. Well, for Portland, it's a heat wave. It's up in the high 90s, low hundreds occasionally, but nothing like what's going on in Arizona and other parts of the country. And if you're someplace where there is a heat wave going on, I hope you are able to find someplace cool to be and enjoy our broadcast here on Time for Hemp. And everybody's wondering how these videos are going, and I can certainly tell you we're getting a lot of audience and we're getting a lot of attention. So we appreciate those of you who are sharing us with your friends, and when you do that, you make us louder and prouder. Also, make it a point to say hello to our sponsors, and I haven't taken a commercial break yet, so that tells me it's the very start of the show. You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. Please share us with your friends.
Serious Seeds is your source for quality cannabis and sativa seeds. Serious Seeds are the creators of legendary strains like AK-47, Bubblegum, Chronic, Cali Mist, and White Russian. The AK-47 is probably the most awarded strain on the planet. The high THC content of AK-47 makes it the perfect medical strain for patients seeking quick pain relief. Cali Mist is an almost pure sativa. Female medical cannabis patients have reported that this strain helps relieve menstrual cramps. Serious Seeds just acquired another Dutch high-quality seed bank, Magus Genetics. From now on, Serious Seeds can offer you even more award-winning strains. The fine folks at Serious Seeds strive to breed the best cannabis genetics that they can find, so patients can rely on the effectiveness of their medicine. Go to SeriousSeeds.com to grow your medicine. That site again is SeriousSeeds.com.
Well, I can certainly tell you we are grateful to the people at Serious Seeds. Because of their support, we are still here being loud, proud, and strong. And So if you get a chance to check out their website, let them know that you heard about them here on the big broadcast. Today we are going to be focusing, as always, on what the name of the show is, Time for Hemp, and we're going to be focusing on Time for Hemp's news feeds. You can find these news feeds in our Tweety and in our Facebook, Tumblr, SoundCloud, Google Plus. We posted a lot of places all around the internet so that we can disseminate, and there's a big $10 word for some people who haven't made it out of high school yet, so that we can spread and share the news and the information about cannabis being used for medicine and hemp being used for creature comforts like paper and fiber and fuel, and the importance of ending prohibition so that we can utilize this plant and make it so that patients who need this medicine from this plant can get their medicine without being arrested and considered criminals, and make it so our farmers can grow this cash crop, and when they do so, then they create jobs here in the community, and that's always a good thing. And so if you get a chance, please write your senator or your congressperson or your governor, your mayor, depending on where you live, and let them know how hemp affects the economy, how hemp affects the production cycle. Because example, there are companies across seas that are competing with American companies, and they both are competing with the same product. Like BMW will make a great car, and we'll make a great car here in America, but BMW is using hemp fiber in the body of their car, which means that their car is way less and or more durable. And that can be true with the cloth. When you've got wool competing with a hemp cloth from the Orient, the American wool is good and strong, but the hemp cloth will last longer, it's more durable. So you got to make it so that we can even compete globally on an equal footing. So again, let the people in your community know, and especially the people who are running for office in your community know, that prohibition must end. On the news feed today, you're going to find an article from UPI called "No Prison Time for California Cops Who Sold Drugs That They Confiscated." Now, you know, when you get pulled over and the cops will say, "I'll tell you what, we're not going to arrest you. If you just let us take your drugs, we'll go ahead and throw them away, and you go on down the road, and this way I don't have to write a ticket and spend time in court. You don't have to go to court. There's nothing on your record. This is such a small amount. I'm going to be some nice cop, and I'm going to let you go." And then they go in on drug raids and put people in jail, confiscate the drugs, and turn in like 90% of what they confiscated and keep 10%. And they went out and sold it. Now, this is Logan August and Derek Penny, and they're former deputies for the Kern County Sheriff's Office and in California. And these clowns were arresting people and pulling people over for drug charges and then turning around and selling drugs. So, you know, the only way we're going to end this type of activity is if we end prohibition and make cannabis legal. And we need to make cannabis legal so that we quit having cops that are going to be doing this kind of nonsense, so that we can have a police department that's even more focused on something, I don't know, more important than arresting people for a plant, like, say, robbery or assault and battery or jeepers. There's all kinds of things that the police can be more focused on than just arresting people for the utilization of drugs. So anyway, make it a point to check that out on our feed today, and if you like it, give it a thumbs up. Maybe make a comment or two underneath the article. That way our sponsors know that people are paying attention. Share it with your friends. There might be people in your circle of friends who might find that of interest, and would appreciate learning about it as well. Also, an interesting note, there is a student from Harvard, well, a former Harvard student, who believes that who believes in building a luxurious weed business. That's his goal. He wants to bring in about $50 million a year in his little business. And to say the least, the guy has a big goal. I don't know how many people can try to achieve such a goal, in a year's time. I mean, even a couple years' time, that's quite a bit to be looking at. But anyway, this guy is the Candescent. I think I'm saying it right. Candescent. Anyway, there's a news report here that we're going to look at, and which I think is very interesting, and this is also going to be on our news feed, of course. So if you want to share it with your friends or you want to learn more about it, well, then just check it out here on the big broadcast on Time for Hemp.
Cannabis, or mezz of cannabis. We're going after that high-end adult use.
Well, that's just packaging.
Look, packaging is one thing, but price is another. Adrian charges hundreds more per pound than the market rate. To me, that's a very risky strategy.
You said to me you can get $3,000 a pound.
Correct.
How do you actually differentiate your product to get an extra 1,000? Is it the packaging?
Packaging is one piece. The quality of our weed, the quality of our cannabis.
Quality of our weed? You got to give me more
Okay.
than just quality of our weed.
Smell of the nose. You'd recognize that our nose doesn't have any chemical burn. You'd recognize that the cure on our product is perfect, that when you break it, it has a perfect snap, which means it's going to be a perfect smoke.
So is there quality control?
There's huge quality control.
Does that mean that you throw a lot away?
What's that?
Do you throw a lot away?
Absolutely.
And he's dropped the usual stoner labels you see in dispensaries. Condensing comes in just 5 varieties, named for the feelings or moods they're supposed to create.
We've moved to a brand architecture where it's just calm, cruise, create, connect, and charge. It's making it accessible. It's giving people analogies in their life. Your purchase becomes a reflection of who you are. When cannabis starts doing that, it's not about being sexy, it's about being relatable. And that's where cannabis is going.
The Profit Marijuana Millions premieres Tuesday, August 8th to 10, CNBC.
Hey, Bob. What's up, man?
I'm just surfing all over the web, trying to find some info on medical marijuana and the best strains of cannabis, advice for growers.
Looks like you're having a hard time, bro.
There's gotta be 1 million websites out there.
True, but you really only need one website to find out what you need. It'll save you a bunch of time.
Sounds great. What is it?
Check out Canafo.com. CANNAFO.com.
That's right, Tommy and Bob. Canafo.com is the world's first online directory, marketplace, news portal, growing advice resource, and social media platform for all things cannabis.
Dude, where's that voice coming from?
You hear that too? Maybe we ought to cut back a little.
Canafo.com is the Google, Facebook, and Craigslist of cannabis. It even has its own social media platform. Canafo.com puts everything cannabis in one place for consumers, business, and growers. Canafo.com is a free service where you can find over 9,000 different strains of cannabis.
Whoa!
Shop cannabis classifieds and much, much more. Canafo.com. Visit today and get in the know with Canafo.
They are a great group of people there at Canafo, and their website is just very bright. And I mean that on so many different levels. It's an informative site for learning about cannabis and learning about where to share cannabis information at, and where to pick up books at, and where to pick up pamphlets, and where to maybe attend conferences, and where to go to expos at. I mean, it's a all-around one-stop spot to learn all about cannabis and what's going on that you might want to plug yourself into if you get a chance to do so. So also let them know that you heard about them here on the big broadcast. That's how we stay going. I want to remind people that we do have a live stream feed at time4hemp.com, and you can listen to us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're all cannabis all the time, and we broadcast into iHeart, Tumblr, and SoundCloud and iTunes. We create a lot of shows. We got a lot of hard-working guests and activists that put together programming to share information about this plant. And when that programming is completed and broadcast, then we upload it to our archives on our website. So you can go to our website and find all the past programs. There's about 3,000 free MP3 theirs to enjoy and download. Just pass them around with your friends. Some are just music, but most of them are talking heads with people like Stroup, who will be on later today, and Elvia Maseka, and Paul Stanford, and many members of the LEAP organization, and many heroes of the cannabis movement actually sat down and took Time for Hemp, and they're all up there. We had about 9, 10, maybe 15 hosts producing programming over the past year, and we still produce about 30 to 40 hours of original content about the need to end cannabis prohibition. Veterans Voices, hosted by Al Byrne and Michael Krawitz, have had Jesse Ventura on as a guest, and Tommy Chung has stopped by to say hello. So has Willie Nelson and Andrew Weil. So we've had a lot of interesting people make it a point to share their information about cannabis and how it has affected their lives and their path. So you might want to go to our archives, check out some of the guest names, and see if there's anything that you might benefit from learning from. It's all free, and you can also find it on YouTube, Tumblr, SoundCloud, because our programming is also archived there, also archived in Spreaker, also archived in iHeart. So there's a lot of places where you can download and find our content to not only listen to, but to pass around, share with friends, broadcast if you want to in your organizational meetings, use for references, for college papers, whatever we can do, to get this message out. That's what we're about, trying to end cannabis prohibition. Unlike some clown by the name of Jeff Sessions, which reminds me, this brings me back to what's going on in our feed today. Apparently, Jeff Sessions has a problem with telling the truth. I know. He's the Attorney General, and you already had your hopes up, high as to having someone of good moral standard to run that office finally after all these years. But the idea of an honest politician too is almost like an oxymoron, so maybe some of you are not surprised, but some of the members of the Senate and Congress were just a little agitated that Jeff Sessions is placing an awful lot on the table about his beliefs and what he wants to do and how he wants to move forward in regards to cannabis and medical cannabis and hemp across the United States. And they're calling him out on the lies. Let me say that again. They're calling him out on the lies that he has made. And so anyway, and I've suggested to you that, you write this guy if you can and let him know that you think he's a clown. We think he's a clown. And if you want to, you could always send him, a book or two or a pamphlet about cannabis or medical marijuana or industrial hemp. If it doesn't educate him, maybe it'll help educate members of his staff. So anyway, you'll find that on our news feed today. And if you like it, please give it a thumbs up. Make a little comment underneath it if you don't mind. And I don't know, write a letter to Jeff Sessions and let him know what a clown you think he is. Pass it around so that others in your group who have time to write a letter might feel inclined to do so. And maybe enough emails and snail mails might make a difference. In fact, many lawmakers are wanting to have this wonderful plant rescheduled. And they're all meeting together in a special get-together. I guess they do this every year to focus on some of the problem bills that they have getting through. I don't know. But anyway, there's a handful of members of the Senate that are getting together, state lawmakers that are focused on making certain that patients have their medicine and we can grow this cash crop and their states can bring in a tax revenue. You know, we knew all along that once it was legal, that the politicians would find some way to tax it. Once they found a way to tax it, they would fall in love with it, because politicians love money, right? So, anyway, and so you can find that too on our Twitty feed, that article. Give it a thumbs up or two, and maybe share it with your friends. Might write a comment underneath it, and maybe print it off and leave it in a dispensary or two, or share it with somebody who doesn't have internet that they might find a benefit if they had a chance to read it. But anyway, that's one of the reasons why we do put the Tweety feeds out, is to get the information that people might miss. They might not have a chance to notice, but it's important enough that they need to be having it available to them when they have a chance to check out the news. We don't do fake news here. And later in the show, we're going to learn how YouTube is now doing more and more censoring. We talked about that yesterday and last week, about how important it is that you share us with your friends. And that way people know we're here, and we make a louder noise, and we get information out into the ears of people like Trey Gowdy. Is that his name? Trey Gowdy? Yeah, he is a well-known member up there on the Hill, and a lot of people might be surprised to find out that that gentleman is also someone who just happens to think we need to reschedule this plant. So, and if you don't believe me, yesterday, remember I showed you how ignorant Jeff Sessions is. Well, there are some bright minds in Washington who are trying to get bills passed and things done for the people. And the more this guy opens his mouth, and the longer he spends time in Washington, D.C., it seems the more I like him.
In case my mom is watching, I want to be really clear. I'm not advocating for the legalization of marijuana. I will be very, very clear about that. However, I don't understand why it's a Schedule 1. It's certainly not treated as a inherently dangerous substance for which there is no medicinal value. It takes a tractor trailer full of marijuana to even trigger a mandatory minimum under our drug laws. So is there any appetite for researching whether or not it should remain a Schedule 1 drug?
Congressman, the administration doesn't have a position on that, but I'm happy to dialogue with your office. And let me just briefly say that we strongly support research on medical use of marijuana. And if there are obstacles that we see that prevent good research, we want to address those obstacles. Because if there are component elements of marijuana that could be put through the FDA process and turned into medicines that could help people in this country, we want to do that. So we do think there's some potential, and we support research on the subject.
Well, just so everyone's clear, methamphetamine is scheduled what?
I believe it's scheduled
2. Cocaine is scheduled what?
Also 2.
Cocaine base is scheduled what? 2. So it is scheduled lower than marijuana. And again, you can schedule something and still not have it scheduled as a 1. And I would encourage the powers that be, whoever you need to consult with in the administration, to at least explore whether or not it's scheduled correctly without being perceived as advocating for legalization.
Understood.
With that, Mr. Connolly, I will give you a chance to, I'm reluctant to say whatever you want, but I'm going to give you a chance to, to conclude.
I thank my friend, and I actually want to follow up, if I may, on what you just asked. So the point being made here in some ways, Mr. Baum, is if you, not you personally, if the government, federal government, on this subject, marijuana, and how dangerous it is, has no credibility because of the lack of serious empirical work, it threatens our whole drug policy's credibility. And you're seeing this happen in marijuana in the states. They're making decisions. Ms. Norton talked about 8 states, but there are over 25 states that have in some fashion, including my home state of Virginia, liberalized their laws for medical reasons all the way to recreational reasons. I think you'd have to confess to the chairman's point, there was no empirical evidence to justify putting marijuana 50 years ago as a Schedule I drug. Who did that empirical evidence?
Sorry, could you repeat that? Who did what? Who made it scheduled?
There was no, I am asserting, and you can feel free to try to contradict, there was in fact no empirical evidence to justify putting marijuana ahead of the drugs the chairman just listed as a Schedule I drug 50 years ago. And I would, you brought up the need to have empirical research before we start rushing pell-mell to approve it for medical purposes, and I agree with you. But here's the problem. As I said in my opening statement, only one federal entity, NIDA, controls marijuana for legal purposes for experimentation, testing, and the like, research. And NIDA's mission is all about proving the harms of something. They've a priori determined the outcome of research. Nobody thinks NIDA is an objective, neutral place to go to look at the good, the bad, and the indifferent about marijuana. It doesn't have that credibility. So if we're going to do what you suggest, we need to have a different entity with credibility where we're looking at objective evidence and science. And then we can determine, well, where does marijuana work? Mr. Humphreys made the point that there's a more lethal or stronger, more fortified versions of marijuana coming out that concern us. But we put a lot of people in jail. And we've treated this like it's more dangerous than cocaine and the other substances the chairman's, and it's had huge consequences based on very little scientific evidence. I'm not arguing for the legalization either. I agree with my friend from South Carolina. I'm not going there. But neither can I justify the current policy of treating it as the world's most dangerous drug with its classification. You can feel free to respond, and I'm done.
Congressman, I understand the point that you're making. I would love to go with you in your district to talk to police chiefs and sheriffs. I think in reality on the street, police, sheriffs, they don't treat marijuana the way they treat heroin and fentanyl. So I think in practice, there is a prioritization of the most deadly drug threats.
I actually think that's his point, is that law enforcement doesn't, our sentencing scheme does not. Methamphetamine and marijuana are not treated the same from a sentencing standpoint, but yet marijuana is considered to be inherently dangerous with no medicinal value, therefore a Schedule I. And it would just be helpful, again, to Mr. Connolly's point, for us to have some consistency, or at least be able to explain why certain drugs are Scheduled I and others are not. And we can save that for another day. And again, that's coming from two people that are not advocating for the legalization, just for some common sense in how it's scheduled. On behalf of all the members, I want to thank all of our witnesses for your expertise.
Well, that's all the different things that are up on the Twitter feed today and the Facebook news feed, which is also on LinkedIn and Google Plus and lots of other places on the internet. We want you to share it with your friends. There's other postings on there as well. We've got about 8 to 10 posts that go up throughout the course of the day. We start posting about 8 in the morning, and by the time we get done posting about 6 in the evening Pacific Standard Time, we've got at least one post, if not 2 or 3, up each hour. And all of it's free. It's like a little news clipper source that when people are busy working and or attending class or having fun in life or just, I don't know, taking time for hemp, they don't have a chance to check out the news, we kind of put it all together in one spot, and when you get a minute, boom, you can quickly glance over it and see what's going on here in the world. Of time for hemp, right?
You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. The only broadcasting network dedicated to ending the global war on drugs on iHeartRadio. Please share us with your friends.
Growsentia has developed Mammoth P, an organically derived soil inoculant that maximizes phosphorus and micronutrient cycling to maximize bud growth, increase yield, and enhance plant health. Mammoth P's patent-pending technology is OMRI certified. The increased levels of phosphorus and other micronutrients result in increased stem strength and a 16% increase in harvest yield. Mammoth P is effective in soil, soilless, and hydroponic systems. This biostimulant microbial product really works synergistically with any nutrient and fertilizers in your management and feeding regime. Incorporate Mammoth P into your feeding protocols as a supplement to any fertilizer program. Mammoth P is being used by growers, commercial and hobbyists throughout the U.S. Go to mammothmicrobes.com to find a store near you or to order through one of the company's online partners. That's mammothmicrobes.com, scientifically proven to grow mammoth buds.
Hey everybody, Joe Joseph here for thedailysheeple.com, and this is your news shot. Now I know all you YouTubers out there are feeling the pain, unless you have fuzzy kitten videos. Maybe that's what I should do, is fuzzy kitten videos. If I did fuzzy kitten videos, probably do a hell of a lot better. Because YouTube's taking controversial steps to censor non-leftists, according to shdfplan.com, which is interesting because I'm the furthest from a right or left person in the whole world. I'm about as independent as they come. So why censor me? I'm as middle of the road as you can be. You know? It's crazy. It says stating that the content is controversial, not the censorship itself. YouTube has taken the first steps to censor dissenting views. Oh, but it gets worse. YouTube will begin to censor your searches and fill the results with propaganda while on its website. Last night, YouTube took to its official blog to more or less announce that they would take steps to censor content that they determined to be controversial, even if that content didn't break any laws or violate the site's user agreement. I love this. This is great. The message made a pledge to be a part of an effort to fight terror content online, but the move was rightly met with widespread skepticism among YouTubers as nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to censor conservative speech. And it's not just controversial content creators that'll be impacted, as anyone who merely searches for keywords that YouTube deems questionable, for whatever reason, will be promptly directed to propaganda videos intended to directly confront and debunk whatever questionable content that user was looking for, meaning that you'll be bombarded with the right kind of propaganda approved by YouTube, designed to get you to think the way YouTube insists upon. That's right. The Daily Caller points out that the responsibility of censorship on YouTube will fall upon impartial groups like the Anti-Defamation League. That's right, the good old ADL, that recently published a list of alt-right and alt-light YouTubers. Ironically, though, they failed to highlight the extreme left organizations like Antifa. Not surprisingly, these moves to censor content creators while shoving propaganda videos down the throats of users have been blasted by conservatives and anti-government activists online who feel like they've been targeted, because we have. And censorship of so-called hate speech has been the cornerstone of tyrannical regimes, such as the Soviet Union. Hate speech is 100% subjective and should never be regulated, but in order to promote fascist ideas, dictators must convince populations to accept their oppression and not speak out. You see, regulation of any speech is a detriment to the human rights of everyone, and that's exactly what our founding fathers knew, and that's exactly why freedom of speech was numero uno on the list. Because the minute you start going down the slippery slope of deeming something that's not correct politically, that may be offensive, now you've just opened the floodgate for anything, and anybody can start a social trend. Anybody can. So this, my friends, is very troubling, not just for us at the Sheeple, but all independent media, because we've all been getting just absolutely devastated, by limiting reach, by limiting the way that you can advertise. It has totally and completely changed the landscape. Now, that doesn't mean of course we're going to survive. You just have to kind of make do, carry on smartly, and find new and different ways to do things. But there's certainly, what they've done is very simple. Here you have these social media platforms that were very, very powerful tools in the past. They still can be, but they're not as much as they used to be because of how much control is exerted upon them. They got people boosted up. They got outlets created. People created entities utilizing these social media platforms, these independent media organizations. And then, just like the Great Depression, just like the powers that shouldn't be, they pull the rug out at the right time. Whoop. And a lot of people fold in because they don't have that survival technique, that tactic. They can't, for whatever reason, find different ways to keep things going. And it's hard. It's hard to do so. One thing's for sure, though. No matter what happens, I can tell you, this voice isn't going to be quiet. I'm Joe Joseph. This was thedailysheeple.com's News Shot. Feel free to comment below and visit our website at thedailysheeple.com. Have a great day.
I can certainly tell you he is not kidding. It is difficult these days to be a member of the alternative media and still get your message heard. And we at Time for Hemp, as you heard Joe Joseph say, we are trying to make changes too and going in different directions so that we can survive, so that we can continue to get the message out. There are patients all around the world still today who have the fortitude and the desire to get out and be part of these movements to end cannabis prohibition, and they want an avenue to be heard. They need a platform where they can tell their stories And the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network is one of those platforms. We do have a lot of archives. Now, when I say that, I think about the many hardworking activists that have passed away. But because we were fortunate enough to have them as guests on our shows, my show, Patients at a Time, Chris Conrad's show, Andrea Herman's show. It's been a lot of programs on the network where we've had a lot of great guests. Wolf Siegel's program, The Farmer in the Sky. I tell you, when you look through our archives, there's a lot of good, hardworking people that are no longer with us. But their messages, their voices, and they're still being heard. Well, this media could disappear if you don't share us with your friends, if you don't get behind us and support us. And I do mean get behind us and support us. We've made it a point to reach out into many different media platforms now because so many people are using handheld devices and smart little book-size computers and computers the size of, I don't know, your watch, you know? I mean, it's amazing what's going on today. And all these little computers, people are using them wherever they go to share information and get information and stay in touch with one another. I know it's amazing if you go to a restaurant and see a family sitting there in a very, very nice restaurant having a very nice meal. At least 2/3 of the family, if not more, are looking at their little devices, you know, and shaking their heads. So we're trying to change too, so that we can get our message into different platforms easy to share. And also easy to digest, because with people on the go all the time, we try to keep the program short. Now that's not true. We have not kept this program short, or the past few programs short. But we're going to try to keep them short, at least under an hour, and that makes it easier for you to share an MP3 with all your friends. So I did say we're going to end the program with an interview I did with Keith Stroup. This is back when he had just rejoined NORML and had taken over the helm of the organization after being gone from it for a while. And it's really interesting to see what he had to say back then and what NORML's doing today. And again, please share us with your friends. And remember, the next time you see me, you'll know that it's, well, you know, time for hemp.
Hello. Joining us today in the program is the Executive Director of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Hello. Joining us today in the program is the Executive Director of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Many of you may know him as somebody in a different capacity, the founder of NORML, Keith Stroup. Stroup?
No, you said it right.
Keith Stroup. Welcome to our show. Now, you started NORML is the impression I got. You're the founder of NORML. How did that all get started? How did that come about?
Well, I was coming out of law school, and I graduated in 1968, and if you remember, those were the height of the anti-war years. Mm-hmm. So like a lot of law students, I'd first been introduced to marijuana as part of the anti-war movement. It was, back then, if you smoked a marijuana cigarette, you were making as much a political statement as you were enjoying a recreational drug. You were essentially thumbing your nose at the establishment that had gotten us into the quagmire of Vietnam. Mm-hmm. But what began to happen were a lot of friends began to be busted. And literally the first few months I was out of law school, I had 2 or 3 friends come to me who had been stopped because they either had long hair and got the attention of the police, or drove a van, or there were all kind of peace signs were on their bumper or whatever. Mm-hmm. And when they'd pull them over, of course, they'd find a joint under the seat or whatever. And as a young lawyer trying to figure out how to help these folks, I had also just spent 2 years working on a group called the National Commission on Product Safety. It was my way to stay out of Vietnam, to be real honest. I managed to get a critical skills deferment and to avoid having to go to the war, and I was about 10 days away from having to ship out when I got that. So I spent 2 years working closely with Ralph Nader, and I was impressed by the techniques he used. And it seemed to us that instead of trying to deal with individuals one by one who were being arrested for marijuana, and at that point, by the way, the arrest rates were about I think about 650,000 people a year, and over 90% of those were for simple possession of an ounce or less. And they were going to jail for long periods of time, especially in states like Texas, but actually all over the country they were.
Okay.
So we thought if we could start an organization that approached the problem the way Nader did on a lot of his issues, with a consumer perspective, and to focus on the unfairness of treating otherwise law-abiding citizens who weren't threatening in any way at all as criminals simply because they preferred to smoke a marijuana cigarette rather than drink alcohol, that there was a good bit of appeal to that if you made that case effectively. So NORML really was a concept that we sat down, thought up, and put together.
And then you took that concept and you made that grow nationwide.
Well, there has certainly had been people with similar ideas before. There had been small groups springing up in different parts of the country. I had trouble getting good funding. It was obviously not a very popular issue back then. And I'm talking now 68, 69, and 70. You were perceived as being radical and certainly out of the mainstream. I managed to get some pretty good funding. I managed to get Playboy Foundation behind the project early on. Hefner would give us space in the magazine to focus on victims, where if we were able to go in and get someone out of jail or whatever. So over a period of a couple of years, we did a lot of traveling. We'd go to Texas, where the situation was probably the worst, and we'd take journalists through the Texas prison system, for example, because we wanted them to meet these people who are being locked up and to see who these victims really were. And in the process of that, the name NORML obviously got some currency, and it began to be recognized by at least a minority of the folks in the country as the public interest group working on marijuana. The major step forward in solidifying the country under one banner had to do with Amorphia on the West Coast. It's a fascinating group that Gordon Brownell and Michael Aldridge and there was a third person had put together, and it was a legalization group, and they raised their funds by selling rolling papers made from cannabis. And if you keep in mind, cannabis is what it's used in Canadian currency. It's used in a lot of things, but it was nonetheless it was an interesting idea because you could, in theory, raise your money from your own constituents to fund the project. The problem was, back then it was similar to, I think, the political situation today. If you were perceived as being pro-pot, of trying to turn on the world, you really couldn't get access to legislatures, and you wouldn't get access to the major media. So we always said we didn't encourage the use of marijuana, but we recognized that for millions of people who made the choice to use it, that's their choice. It's part of the right to privacy. So Amorphia had trouble continuing, making their project work because they were perceived as a little bit over the line. So we got to know them. They were doing very good work on the West Coast, and we were doing good work in most of the rest of the country. So we merged Amorphia with NORML. We opened up a West Coast office. One of their people ran it. One of their people came back and helped me run the East Coast office. And so from about 1973 on, I think most of the serious work on marijuana law reform was done under the banner of NORML.
Now, when I was first hearing about NORML back in the 70s, I'm from Indiana, and news travels a little slower, usually 2 or 3 years behind.
I'm from Southern Illinois, so I know it.
Okay. We were always under the impression that if you got busted for anything, whether it was a joint, a bag, no matter where you were at in the United States, if you got into a spot, call NORML. They're there at your side, and they'll fight for you.
Well, and I think we pretty well did that. Now, I'm sure there were cases where the help we offered them may not have been as comprehensive as one would like to offer, but we had a lot of calls. But we also had a lot of young lawyers like myself, but spread all over the country, who were getting out of law school about 67, 68, 69. They'd been radicalized by the anti-war movement. They began to get active in other social issues. So it was feasible back then that when those phone calls came into my office in Washington, I could pick up the phone, and I had lists of half a dozen or more dedicated, active lawyers in almost every state that would, at no cost, drive across the state or whatever, get a bail hearing, get this poor kid out of jail, figure out if they could negotiate something, or if not, represent him. And most of those times for no fee at all. They were really dedicated lawyers. So I think that was an accurate perception of a lot of our activity in the 70s. But again, keep in mind that we had to help people, because that's what the guts of the issue was about. And we also had to make sure the rest of America who didn't smoke marijuana got to know some of these people. And the way we did it was we would go help them, and then we would, with their permission, publicize the case, both in the local media and sometimes in the national media.
When did that start to change? I know that people now sometimes when they ring up NORML, they have difficulties in reaching assistance.
I'm not sure I can exactly follow it. I can tell you I was with NORML we started it in 1970, and I left in mid-1979, so I ran it for about the first 10 years. Their political side, I think, atrophied during the 80s. They still have an active legal committee, but it's a legal committee that mainly holds CLE programs. In other words, they train other lawyers.
Okay.
And they do some very good work, and they have some of the finest lawyers in the country that still are active on that side. But when the political climate of the country began to get more conservative, I would say the parents group started making a big impact, anti-drug impact in the late 70s, and then they really took hold in the early 80s. NORML got positioned somehow to where they were no longer allowed to play. If you had a legislative hearing in Congress or in one of the states during the 70s, they wouldn't have thought about having a hearing without inviting us to have at least one spokesperson. And in fact, the majority of the hearings that were held, we put on. We had a traveling roadshow of psychiatrists and pediatricians and researchers. Dr. Whipple, a wonderful pediatrician in her 80s, Zinberg and Weil at Harvard, Ungerleider at UCLA. We had some world-recognized psychopharmacologists and others who were willing, and we would raise the money to do this, but we would line up 3 or 4 states and set up state legislative hearings and take these people state to state so they could hear from the real experts.
Excellent.
Sometime in the early 80s, they quit allowing NORML to participate, and we were defined once again, or the organization was, as being too radical. Okay. But I don't think NORML had changed. I think the country had changed. It had gone this direction to the right.
Okay. Now, I know that our laws have gotten a little different over the past several years, and we hope to cover some of these aspects in your opinions, if they've gotten worse or better, when we come back after this. Welcome back to our discussion with Keith Stroup. Keith, do you think that the laws have gotten worse or better? I mean, in some ways they've gotten, and we know that we got the medical taken care of now, maybe in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And so that is positive, but on the overall, do you think they've gotten worse or better?
Well, it shows one's age to be able to put it in perspective, but I will tell you that if you've been at this for a while, or if someone's been focusing and interested in the drug issue for some time, in the late 60s, it was the first war on drugs was announced by the president, and they passed a major anti-crime bill. I believe it was in 69, that in fact included a provision introduced by then Congressman Ed Koch, who of course subsequently was the mayor of New York for many years, to require him to set up something called the Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse. And it sort of went unnoticed by the DEA and the government agencies that thought they were getting through, this first anti-drug bill. Now, I'll connect back up with that in a second, but in answer to your question, the laws at that time were very tough indeed. For example, in 1970 and 71, in the state of Texas, they had over, it's been a while since I've thought about these figures, but they had over 100 people locked up for life sentences for possession of an ounce or less of marijuana.
Life sentence?
For life sentences. They had something like 600 people serving more than 30-year terms. So there were pockets of the country where the laws were as outrageous then as they are in the worst place today. I think the major change has been that people are more aware of the tough laws now because they tend to be federalized. Congress every year tries to outdo what they did the year before, and they pass more minimum mandatories, and they pass more death penalty categories where people can be put to death. It has no impact, of course, on crime. It has no impact on drug use, but it's a demagogic experience that politicians find works for them, so they keep doing it. So things are, I would say, about as bad now as they've ever been, because you've now had all of the Reagan era and 2 years of the Bush era where they're trying to outdo themselves and show how against drugs they are by locking up more and more people. But I will say this, I don't think it's any worse today than it was in the late 60s, early 70s, and in particular, I don't think the climate overall is any worse.
Okay.
You got to remember, we were coming out of the reefer madness era, and we hadn't moved very far beyond that by the late 60s. There were still people that thought if you smoked marijuana, it was addictive or it made you commit violent crimes. I mean, things that now seem kind of, well, like children might talk about, but nobody who's educated would discuss those things. They were perceived as being accurate in the late 60s. So what I see is a cyclical movement where, interestingly, there was a book by David Musto, a professor of history at Yale University, that he used to do some testifying for us, that he talks about the history of narcotics legislation generally. And it tends to go in, say, decade-long jumps where you'll go for a decade and the country will be somewhat permissive. especially if the economy is doing well. We tend to be a little bit more willing to let our neighbor do what they want as long as they don't bother us. And so you get in a period where, as we were in the early 70s up through the late 70s, where the country essentially said, we don't really care if you smoke marijuana. Don't flaunt it in our face, but we shouldn't lock you people up in jail with real criminals. But at some point, then the pendulum starts swinging back, and clearly for the last 12, 13 years, it has been going in a more conservative direction. But that too will change. And I suppose what I want people to understand is it is often during the times of the worst repression or oppression that political activists and public interest associations do their most creative and most valuable work. Our best work at Normal, I honestly believe, was during the early and mid-70s when it was tough out there and there was a threat of being arrested at every stop, and the police were, they didn't even want us coming into town. When we started making progress and started being more acceptable, and then when Jimmy Carter became president, etc., it was difficult to know what to do. We weren't used to being insiders. So I would suspect what you're going to see is, as bad as things are today, 3 or 4 years from now, I think we will look back and feel very good about the progress and unexpected progress in a lot of cases that are going to be made in the next few years. I don't think it's a hopeless situation.
God, I hope so. There are so many people out there now.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Victims. Now, you commented earlier in our discussion that you worked in association with Ralph Nader. Now, that must have been interesting and beneficial to what you were doing at Normal.
Well, I think he's the ultimate public interest lawyer and probably the role model for hundreds and hundreds of people who came along after him. I was lucky in that when I was hired at this Commission on Product Safety, they hired 4 young lawyers right out of law school. And our immediate boss was a lawyer from Harvard who had been Ralph Nader's roommate in law school. And when Nader first came and set up his first public interest group in Washington, this man had been his executive director. So it gave me a chance to study at the feet of people who I consider to be the masters. I think they've probably defined the whole field of public interest law.
Okay. Now, do you see the hemp movement taking a major effect into the economy soon? And if so, on a national scale? Or is it a global outside of America? Or
well, I've been fascinated by the attention paid in the last year or two, finally, to arguments that had sometimes been made earlier, but apparently didn't catch on for some reason. What I saw is during the 70s, we focused on getting kids out of jail, or people out of jail for smoking grass. That seemed to be the area that needed the attention, and also the area that people were willing to reconsider. Maybe they are overreacting to this whole question of whether somebody smokes a joint. The medical issue began to come along in the mid-70s when I remember when Bob Randall first walked in my office and said, I'm a glaucoma patient. When I smoke marijuana, my vision clears up. I thought this is wonderful news. I also wondered if I was dealing with somebody who was a little flaky. Now, over the years, obviously, I got to know Bob. I greatly respect him, and he's led the charge on this whole question of the medicinal uses of marijuana. But for a number of years, I think that issue has carried its burden. There's been probably more progress made in that part of the drug issue in the last 10 years than in any other. Now what I see is this ecology and economy movement beginning to discuss seriously what hemp could do for our economy and how it could help us avoid polluting our ecology. All of that is both good in the sense that I think it has merit in its own right. It's also good because it makes it more difficult for those who want to continue to treat us as criminals to justify marijuana as some evil drug. So I'm delighted at the movement. I suspect that it has there'll be a lot of progress in that area too.
Okay, now currently you're working for the National Association for Criminal Defense Lawyers. Could you tell us a little bit what that's about, and does it still allow you to keep your hand active in the hemp movement?
Well, I haven't really for the last 10, 12 years. I haven't been active in it. I still know some of the people, and occasionally I'll drop by a meeting or something. I certainly feel a sense of history and connection to it. But the hemp movement, I think, is kind of a younger person's game. Not entirely, but I mean, I think it's important for all issues that every few years you have a new young group of idealistic and committed and energized people who care very much about the issue that you kind of pass the baton to. Sometimes they take it. I mean, they're just good enough, they start doing good work, and you start realizing you want to help them with their projects. Now, what I do now is not terribly different, but it's not quite as focused. I represent a cadre of lawyers who are terribly committed to the Bill of Rights. They're very concerned that the war on drugs has in fact become a war on the Constitution. And that what the Supreme Court has done, in essence, is they've created an exception to the Fourth Amendment that's a drug exception. If drugs are involved in a fact situation, they will overlook police conduct or overlook the absence of a warrant and justify it on the basis of it's drugs.
Okay.
But if it's in an area without drugs, absolutely, they throw the evidence out. Well, there's no drug exception in the Constitution. That's been created. They don't call it that, but that's what they've done.
Okay.
So I do much the same kind of work, but it's a little more broad-based. We oppose the death penalty. We train criminal defense lawyers so that they can do a better job at assuring that a citizen who is arrested has a fair chance to tell his side of the story, and that unless the government meets their burden, that individual ought not to be in jail. Okay. It's important work. It's not terribly different from what I did at Normal.
Okay. We have about a minute left. Our audience, I'm sure, is very interested in your background and your knowledge and your perception of your avenues that you've walked down in life. Is there anything that you'd like to share that would be
well, I'll tell you, there was once when I was young, I'm 47, so when I was younger, I guess I'm not quite dead yet, but I went to Ramsey Clark when I was first thinking about starting Normal, because he was a hero of mine from his anti-war work, etc. And I wanted to do it. I had it formulated, but it was a little scary to quit my job and jump off the deep end. Ramsey said to me, I'd read his book, I'd read his book, Crime in America, and he talked about the need to legalize drugs. He said, Keith, do it. And I said, well, I want to, but I need encouragement from people like you who I respect, and you're wiser. It seems kind of suicidal. And he said, do it when you're young, when you can be idealistic and make those kinds of risks, take those kinds of chances. When you're older and you have kids in college, you have other considerations you have to make. So I would say the same thing to younger folks. If you've got a sense of commitment and you feel that something you care about is important enough, follow that. It really is important. I have never had a moment of regret for the 10 years I spent running Normal.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed having you on our show. I'd like to have you come back sometime.
Thank you, Casper.
And until we have the opportunity to get together, keep active in your community, keep healthy, keep wise, keep strong.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spent. Take another look and spend some time for him. Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yes, it's time for him. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 bales of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rest. Well, time for help! Yeah.
Have you ever had a problem with overcooking your cannabis oil? You probably wanted to rip your hair out when you burned off all the THC, right? I even cried one time when my brownies failed to make a good impression at the party. Well, I stopped crying when I found Magical Butter. Magical Butter is a device with a microprocessor-controlled program sequencer. It was designed by a scientist and a chemist to precisely extract the benefits of various herbs. Magical Butter easily makes botanical butter, oils, tinctures, lotions, sauces, and more. Magical Butter heats your oil and your herbs at the perfect temperature every time. Check us out at magicalbutter.com because it's magical. Okay, there's a lot of science and chemistry involved, but it sure works like magic.
You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. broadcasting network dedicated to ending the global war on drugs on iHeartRadio. Please share us with your friends.